I'm Ranger Rhonda, and normally I would be welcoming you to Great Smoky Mountains National Park, but today is just a little bit different. This is a video series where we'll be exploring natural spaces right where the Smokies park rangers, park staff, and park partners live. So I invite you to come enjoy an outdoor experience with us in this episode of Smokies at Home. Hi, I'm Ranger Rhonda from Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and I'm here at my home out this evening exploring and making some observations of some of the wonderful organisms that are thriving here. One of my favorite, though, is hidden in plain sight. It is everywhere here in the southern Appalachian Mountains. And now I say that it's hidden in plain sight because of the fact that it is everywhere, but most people don't really pay any attention to it or take notice of it until somebody points it out to them. And so that's what I'd like to do this evening, is point out to you, highlight, spotlight this wonderful organism called lichen. Now, I chose the spot where I'm standing here on purpose because I've got some wonderful examples of lichen growing on 3 different structures or substrates. Let's take a look. This is the dogwood tree that I was standing right next to you, and you can see this white patch right here, that is lichen. Over here, I've got another dark patch that is lichen, and another growth form right here, another light patch. And then I've got this really interesting one up here on this upper branch. That's lichen as well. Now, so this is growing on a tree. If you look right here behind the tree at this old fence line, you can see those green patches all over it. That is all lichen as well. And this one here, you can see this, it's the similar type of growth form, but they're actually 2 different species because they're 2 different colors. And then just right next to that, I've got a rock here. And on this rock, you can see several different patches of lichen growing on it as well. One of the amazing things about lichen is that it doesn't need soil to grow, or it wouldn't be growing on my rock here. As a matter of fact, it plays a vital role in the creation of soil. If an area has an environmental disturbance, like a fire or a volcanic eruption, lichen is one of the very first living organisms to come and inhabit the area, the barren, lifeless areas. It is actually, because of that, referred to as a pioneer species. It is what provides the organic matter that is required in the creation of soil. Today I've got a couple friends with me to help us take a closer look at lichen. Hey Joey, what are you doing today?
Thanks Ranger Rhonda, and hey y'all, I'm Joey with the Great Smoky Mountains Institute at Tremont, and today we're going to be doing a deep exploration of one of my favorite organisms, lichen. So I'm fortunate enough to be here in the national park, but as we'll soon see, lichen can be found just about anywhere. So if you want to follow along with this activity at home, you absolutely can. But there are a few things that you're going to need.
First, you're going to need a journal. Check. Next, a pencil. Check. You'll also need a magnifying glass or hand lens. Check. Finally, the ability to make careful observations.
That leaf is green.
Check. So now that we have everything we need, let's go find some lichen.
So you might now be asking, where exactly can I find these lichen? And that is an excellent question. And the short answer is everywhere. Big ol' rocks. The front of signs.
A stick on the forest floor.
The back of signs.
An old fence. Big trees, small trees. A stick in a field. Smooth bark, rough bark. Those things in parking lots. A stick stuck in a tree. Boulders. Fallen bark. A stick shaped like a Y. A half-buried rock. Literally any stick.
So one more quick note before we get out there and start exploring. And this has to do with moss, because it can be pretty difficult to tell the difference between lichen and moss. So let's get down here and check this out. Here we have one rock that has both lichen and moss growing on it. So right here, we've got the moss. It's a little bit softer, a much more dark, kind of deep green. And then right below it, we have some lichen. You can already see it's a little bit paler, and it is not soft. And in fact, sometimes, especially when it's dry, it can be downright crunchy. So moss is kind of softer, deeper green, and then lichen tends to be paler and crunchy. But if you aren't sure what you have, who cares? Just journal about it and maybe you can look it up later. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is that lichen is a living thing. So we got to make sure that as we explore, we are not breaking any lichen off of its substrate because that's where it lives. So unless you find your lichen on a small stick or something like that, make sure you leave it where you find it. All right, so it's time to get out there and start finding these things. Make sure you document any discoveries you make in your journal. So everybody's journal is gonna look a little bit different, but I do have some tips that'll make for a solid journal entry.
Once you've found your specimen, celebrate, for this is a victory. Once you're done celebrating, get out your journal and start by noticing the physical characteristics of your lichen. Maybe it's crusty. Maybe it's leafy. Maybe it's shrubby. Maybe you're not even entirely sure that it is a lichen. Whatever, just journal about it. Use a drawing to attract your attention to detail. Is there anything you can count or measure? Nice, throw that in there. Is there anything that deserves a close-up? Sick, draw that too. Next, write down any questions that you come up with about your lichen. Maybe this question has no answer.
Hey lichen, do you ever feel regret?
Maybe it's a question that requires research.
Seriously, what even is this thing?
Maybe it's a question that you can answer with a simple observation or experiment. Maybe you write down some possible answers to that question. Maybe you misspell one of those answers, but just roll with it anyway. Maybe you rub something weird on your face to test one of those answers. Maybe all you really needed to do was look a little bit closer and you could have found the answer right in front of your face and really didn't need to rub anything on it in the first place. I really don't know. That's up to you. Lastly, make connections and think creatively. Take a good look at your lichen again. Is there anything in particular that it reminds you of? Draw it and write that on down. You can even write a letter from the lichen to its substrate. Dear Rock, it's your friend, the lichen. I just want you to know you are so nice. I am really liking living on you. I promise I will never take you for granted. Maybe you come up with something even more creative. Again, this one's up to you.
Now, as you explore and find your lichen, you may find that they tend to fall into one of three categories. So let's take a deeper look at these categories.
First up, we have those crusty lichens, which we call crustose lichens. Crustose lichens are completely flat against their substrate, not raised up at all. In fact, if you didn't know any better, you might just mistake crustose lichens for a spot of paint or even an area of discoloration. Next up, we have the leafy variety of lichen, otherwise known as foliose. We can remember foliose lichen because foliage is a word that refers to leaves, so foliose means leafy. These lichen, while they're kind of flat against their substrate, are also raised up in a lot of places, so they're very easy to recognize. Lastly, we'll check out the shrubby variety of lichen, otherwise known as fruticose lichen. These lichen are very bushy, and they tend to have branches and be very soft and kind of hairy sometimes. We can remember that they are fruticose lichen because, like an apple, which is a fruit and connected to the tree via a single stem, fruticose lichen are connected to their substrate with a single stem-like point.
So now we have a better idea of the types of lichen that we can find. But to see what these lichen have in common and to see what's going on beneath the surface, it's time for fun with whiteboards.
So you may have been thinking, these lichen are green, they're similar to moss, and we tend to find them in moist environments. So they must be some kind of plant, right? However, you thought! Lichen are actually a symbiosis, two kinds of organisms living together. In this case, those organisms are a fungus and an algae. To understand this better, we need to know the basics of how these two organisms work on their own. Fungi are composed of these tiny root-like tubes called hyphae. Each tube is just one cell thick, and between each cell, there's an opening called a septum, which allows nutrients and genetic material to move freely through the hyphae, almost like a tiny pipe or fiber optic cable. However, These fungi can't produce food on their own like plants, and while many fungi get their nutrition from decomposing organic matter, lichen have developed a different strategy, and this is where the algae come in. Algae are essentially single-celled plants. They have a chloroplast, which allows them to absorb sunlight and convert that solar energy into food. It's also what gives algae that green color. So when you put them together, you get something like this. Here's an artist's flawless rendering of a cross-section microscopic view of a lichen. The outer surface of the lichen is composed of densely packed fungal hyphae that serve as a protective outer barrier. Beneath this layer, the hyphae are slightly more spread out, forming a sort of mesh that surrounds the algae. As the algae photosynthesize, the fungal cells siphon away the food that they produce, fueling the lichen's growth. So you can kind of think of the algae as tiny little solar panels.
So as we've seen, lichen are incredibly hardy organisms. They can grow on a wide variety of surfaces and require little to no soil in order to survive. However, because they rely on their algal partners, they're not exactly invincible. Algae require gas from the atmosphere in order to produce their food, so they can't quite thrive in an area that has poor air quality. For this reason, we call lichen bioindicators, or living things that tell us about the health of the environment where we find them. To explore a little bit more about what lichen can tell us about air quality, I'm going to send it over to my friend Julie. Julie!
Thanks, Joey. I'm Julie with Discover Life in America. Like Joey said, lichens are everywhere. I live in the city, but I still have lots of lichens near me. I'm here at my local park to show you how scientists use lichens to learn about air quality. Will you find a tree near you and join me? You can follow along with the Schoolyard Lichen Survey worksheet at smokies.org. Here's what you'll need: the Lichen Survey worksheet or a notebook, a pen or pencil, a measuring tape, some string, a piece of clear cellophane or plastic wrap with our lichen monitoring form on it, a marker, a pair of scissors, some clothespins, or another way to hold our plastic onto our tree, a magnifier to look at our lichen closely, a compass or a compass app on a smartphone. All right, we've got all our gear. Let's get started. So first, find a tree, ideally a tree that's nice and covered with lichen like this one. If you have a compass, use it to figure out what direction of the tree you're going to look at first and record that on your sheet. Use your measuring tape to measure 4.5 feet from the ground. This is the standard height that foresters use to measure trees. Tie a string around your tree at this height and cut it with the scissors. You may need a buddy to help you with this. Tie another string a few inches above that and another one a few inches below it. Now we'll add our lichen counting sheet. I've just made this out of a piece of old plastic. You can use saran wrap or anything else that you have around the house. And I copied the sheet with the circles from the bottom of the Schoolyard Lichen Survey. We'll attach it with our clothespins. So now we'll take our marker and find box number 1 on your worksheet to correspond with box number 1 on the top left of our plastic sheet. And we'll fill in all of the little bubbles that have lichen in them. So for this square, 5 of my bubbles had lichen and 5 of them did not have lichen. And you can record the different kinds of lichen on the sheet as well. But we'll write 5 and 5. Now do the same thing with the rest of the squares. Now we'll use our notebook or our worksheet to record how many of the bubbles from each had lichen, how many had moss, and how many were just bare bark. If you remember the 3 different types of lichen, we can break it down into crustose, foliose, and fruticose lichen. On the lower part of your worksheet, you'll see a box for the total number of each type of lichen or moss or bark for all of your squares. So for me, I had lichen in 46 out of my 90 bubbles and bare bark in 44. And of that, 39 of those bubbles were foliose and only 7 were crustose, and none were moss or fruticose. So now we'll take those total numbers and divide them by 90, which is our total number of bubbles. You'll get a number that's less than 1, and that's okay. So those are kind of weird numbers, but to make it more useful, we will multiply all of those weird numbers by 100, and this will give us the total percentage of this space that is covered by lichen. And we'll use that to kind of estimate the percentage of the whole tree that's covered by lichen. How do scientists use this data? Researchers that study plants know that there are some types of plants that are very sensitive to different types of pollution, like ground level ozone or acid rain. You can do another Smokies at Home activity and collect data on a virtual plant that shows damage due to air pollution. This activity is called ozone damage data collection. Researchers have wondered whether lichen are sensitive to air pollution as well. It turns out that it's complicated. Some types of lichen are sensitive and some aren't. If you had to guess which growth form of lichen is most sensitive to air pollution, which would you guess? Crustose, foliose, or fruticose? The answer is foliose. Fruticose is a good guess because it sticks out and gets surrounded by air. But it turns out that fruticose lichen has a nice hard thallus or coating that protects it. Foliose lichen is the most sensitive because it has the largest surface area. This is one of the most sensitive lichens in the Smokies. It tends to be very large and really sticks out into the air away from the tree bark. It is sensitive to sulfur pollution in the air that's part of acid deposition or acid rain, and it's especially sensitive when it gets wet. If the air quality were very good in this park, do you think I would find lots of lichen or just a few lichen? Many different types or mostly just one kind? I live in a city. If Ranger Rhonda did this activity at her home, do you think her results would be different than mine? Would there be more lichen or less? Do you think the growth types that she would find would be different?
Thanks, Julie. Those are some great questions. And asking those questions and thinking about 2 different locations is a great way to extend this activity. You could do an inventory or a survey around where you live, and then do another one maybe in your schoolyard, and then compare. Ask some of those same questions that Julie asked. Are we finding the same types of growth form? Are we finding them in the same ratios or percentages? Are we finding some of the growth forms grow differently on different substrates in the different locations? All very good way to find out what's going on around you where you are. When we do those things on the park, though, we don't just, because what Julie did, she did a survey, which we call an inventory. And an inventory is a snapshot in time. She looked at what she had there in her park today. What we do, though, is we like to do those inventories over a long period of time. And when we do it over a long period of time, we call that monitoring, because that monitoring can tell us things. The word that Joey introduced to you, that bioindicator, we can look at the lichen and how it's growing and its composition and its density and make some assumptions and make some thoughts and some ideas about what's going on. If we see that tree lungwort, that very sensitive foliose lichen that Julie introduced you to, if we see that decreasing in its amount, or if we see it increasing in its composition, we can think, okay, if it's increasing, the air quality is getting much better. If it's decreasing, then we might be concerned that the air quality is getting a little bit worse. And so over time, doing those surveys over time is something that you can do as well around your own home or even in your schoolyard to give you an idea of what's happening over time with the air quality that you live in. So I hope that you've had fun with us today. Maybe we have inspired you or challenged you to go out and explore that organism that is everywhere, hidden in plain sight, lichen. But before we go today, I do want to thank my friends and partners today. I want to thank Joey from Great Smoky Mountains Institute at Tremont and Julie from Discover Life in America for joining me today and sharing their love and their passion for lichen as well. So I'm going to say bye for now, and I hope to see you again real soon. One of the amazing things about lichen is that it doesn't need soil to grow, or it wouldn't be growing on my rock here. In fact, it plays a vital role in the creation of soil. If an area has an environmental